Welcome to this video called Multidimensional Beings Living in Space and Time. It is the last video in this series of human consciousness and time. Let's review our familiar universe of space and time. We have three-dimensional space, and that has length, width, and height to give us the three dimensions, and we measure these in units of meters or feet, kilometers, miles, or light years. And then we have the single variable of time. We experience time as a continuous sequence of the moments of now. And if we draw a line, we plot it from the past to the future, and we measure it in units of seconds, minutes, hours, or years. So what is time? We think of time as shown here, a clock, and we say, the time is 9:20. But that is not time. But what we're showing here is an instrument that measures change in matter in units we call time. So time is fundamentally the energy of change. Clock time, on the other hand, is an instrument that measures the amount of change in units of seconds, hours, or years. We use the fact that the Earth spins around its axis and the Earth rotates around the Sun to define this clock time. Without matter, there is no time. What is space? Now, the picture on the left shows a sculpture garden. We typically think of this as space. But this is not space, but matter in space. Without matter in it, space has no dimensions. Space and time are two sides of the same coin. There is no space without time, and no time without space. They are interlinked. Without matter, there is no way to experience either space or time for us humans. Now, let's consider two interlinked universes. In the other Matrix of Time series, a universe of time based on Dewey Larson's work was proposed. So let's quickly summarize how these two universes would interlink. On the left, we have the universe of 3D space and a variable of time, and that's the one that we're very familiar with. We have the familiar variable of time, which is everywhere in our universe, and I had labeled it non-local time, being that it's everywhere. We also have our familiar 3D space of matter, and I labeled that local space. Now, in this other universe of 3D time and a variable called space, we have three-dimensional time of matter, and that becomes local time because matter in local time is easily identified in a location, and there's a variable of space which is everywhere in this universe, and that is called non-local space. So think of this space as like a uniform fog, which is everywhere the same, so it has no dimensions to it, no direction, and we'd call that non-local space. So I wanted to go over this concept of extra dimensions and universes. Typically, we think of extra dimensions as being separated in space. For instance, we have our familiar space universe of matter, and if there was another matter universe in 3D time, it would be in some other location in space. But what we need to do is think of these as interlinked in space, and as shown as the diagram in the bottom right. And think of it in terms of water. You have hydrogen and you have oxygen that are interlinked and create water. So the two are present in the same location. But for us, one of these universes is detectable by us, and the other universe is undetectable, but we know it should be there. Quantum reality of these two universes. Both these quantum states would exist at the same time, but not necessarily in the same moment of now. In one universe, the human particles are far apart in space, and I've denoted this by the solid gray and green humans, and the same with the solid gray and green atoms that are on the edges of the space universe. And in another universe, there would be no distance apart since they are in the same place in time, and those I've denoted as the humans in this waveform, the gray and the green, and the same with the atoms in their waveform gray and green, because they are in the same place in the time universe. So our experience of time is more like a series of nows, like a movie. So if we look at old school movies, you have images that are static, that are shown through a projector, and they're shown at a minimum of 24 images in a second, and this gives us the illusion of a continuous reality. So the way I describe it here is you have one static image that is now 1, another one there's been a change, the hiker moving a little bit to the right, that is now 2. Again, in the third image, the hiker moves a little bit further to the right, that's now 3. And when you put these together, like in the right-hand side, and they go together, you get the illusion that the hiker is actually walking closer to the mountain. So quantized energy. Energy, which quantum theory shows comes in discrete packets called quanta. So what does this mean? Let's assume that the energy it takes for the speed of an automobile comes in packets of 5 miles per hour. That means that the car can go 20 miles per hour or 25 miles per hour, but it can never go 22 miles per hour. Now change, which is another form of energy, is fundamentally time. So it also comes in discrete packets, making time quantized. So time can be shown as a series of discrete events where the change that happens from one frame to another is captured and appears to us as continuous reality. Time is a set of discrete nows. We typically think of the now as a continuous series of events, as shown by this gray to white image that goes from the past to the future. But in reality, time is a series of discrete events, just like the static images that create the illusion of a continuous reality, as shown in the movie example. So now we'll show 2 movies through the same projector. And basically we have a set of images here, which are 3 images that are a hiker hiking a mountain. This relates to our familiar universe of 3-dimensional space and 1 variable of time. And then the other images would be related to our consciousness, and this would be related to 3-dimensional time and a variable of space. And so what this projector does is it has a very special light source. When the hiker image is in front of the light source, it emits visible lights, and for the other images, it emits light beyond the visible range. On the left-hand side, we have a human represented by 2 parts, a yellow and a green. And the yellow part of the human only sees 1 movie, the one that's lit by the yellow bulb. And that's because this is the part of the human that we relate to. It's the one that has the ability to see with our eyes, to hear with our ears, to touch with our skin. The green part of the human is our consciousness, and our consciousness perceives our reality. And that would be more like the perception of our inner life, like our imagination and inner visualizations. And so the images that are lit by the projector when the bulb is not yellow, in this green represented as invisible light, would be perceived by us as our inner consciousness. And so here you have a human, one part yellow, which is local in 3-dimensional space, and the other one consciousness in 3-dimensional time, perceiving 2 different realities, but only one is cognized by us, and that's the one of the hiker moving to the mountain. So let's change this to the present time with digital technology and 3D movies. 3D movies use polarization to present 2 slightly different images, one to the left eye and one to the right eye, and the brain creates a 3D image in our brain. So in this example, the first image is vertical polarization, and that would mean that only the left eye would see it with the polarization glasses. The second image is horizontal polarization, which means that the right eye would see this particular image, and then the third one goes back to the left. And what you notice between the horizontal and the vertical is that the images are slightly displaced, and that's necessary because the brain takes these 2 slightly different perspectives of exactly the same scene and creates the 3D image inside of our brain. So let's go back to the 2 interlinked realities. In this example, we get the same digital projector using polarization, and you've got 2 people going to the same movie, and they have headphones on. And the person on the left, person number 1, has polarization glasses that only have vertical polarization in them. And the person on the right, person number 2, has horizontal polarization glasses. And so you have these two interleaved movies. They're being presented about 70 times a second each one, so a total of about 140 per second, so that both would appear continuous. So the person number one would see the hiker movie, and their headphone set would have the soundtrack for the hiker movie. Person number two would see the dancing movie, because this is presented in the horizontal polarization, and they would have the soundtrack piped into their headphone set. So these two people leave the movie theater and described what they liked about the movie. And the person number one says, what a great hiking movie it was. And person number two says, I saw this movie about dancing. So these two people experience two completely different realities in the form of a movie coming from exactly the same projector sitting right next to each other. So this I wanted to use as an example where you can have two people right next to each other in the same place but experiencing two completely different inner realities in consciousness. So what about our two interlinked realities? So if we go back to the example where we have the polarization glasses, and the vertical polarization is the information that we can cognize in this moment of now with our senses in our familiar space universe. And then in the next moment of now, we have information that we cannot sense with our senses in our familiar 3D space universe. So we cannot cognize this moment with our senses, but only with our consciousness in the time universe where the energy of change is. And then when it flips back to the vertical polarization and we come back to our familiar space universe, we can see that the human, their hair color has changed. I use this as a very simple example. Obviously, one moment of now, the person's hair is not going to change whiter, but I wanted to put some change in here so that there's a difference between the first moment of now and the second moment of now. And we cognize this new moment of now changed by the energy of time. We use clocks to measure the amount of clock time it took to create this change in units of seconds, hours, or years. Now let's expand this a little bit more and talk about our dual universe experience. So here the yellow represents, again, the person that's in the familiar 3D space and time universe. And then the wave consciousness part is the other part of us. And what I've done on the left-hand side is I've shown a brain and a heart. So the brain represents our thoughts and the heart represents our feelings. So let's take the first step. And what I'm going to do is show you where these are primarily experienced. So the dark rose is where this level of reality is primarily experienced, which is the local experience in our familiar space universe. And here we have Mickey Mouse and the glasses, and they're in a shape and form that we can easily cognize, we can see them, we understand them, and this is obviously processed in our brain. The next one is the distributed form, the non-local experience in the time universe, and here we see Mickey in the distributed form and the glasses in their holographic form, and this is processed by our consciousness, and this is primarily perceived through our feelings. So again, this is a very simple example, but it gives you an understanding of where these two realities are primarily processed. And again, you've got the third situation is it goes back to our familiar space-time universe, except it's being changed. And that again is processed in the brain. That is through our thoughts and all that sensory input. And we go to the fourth one, which is back to the non-local experience in the time universe, and that is primarily experienced through our feelings. So I hope this example gives you a crude understanding of how we are multidimensional beings and we're processing all this information in dramatically different ways. So in summary, you as a multidimensional being, you have access not only to the familiar universe of 3D space outside of you, but also to another whole universe of 3D time inside of you. We cannot deny that we have programmed some significant changes into the world around us. These changes started out as ideas in our consciousness, accumulated energy as more intention and attention was put into them until they manifested in our local society, then in our cultures, and then some of them in our global consciousness. Hopefully this series has given you a more expanded view of who you potentially are, your place in this universe, and how in each moment of now you can impact the future through the changes first inside of you and then in the world around you. Takeaway messages. Time is the energy of change. We use clock time to measure this change in units of seconds, hours, years, etc. The universe of time is intellect to our familiar universe of space. They are two sides of the same coin. Examples of movies were given to show how time is a sequence of discrete nows. The same example of movies were used to show how we process two different universes to give us the full experience both inside and outside of ourselves. The last example attempted to show that we experience our familiar space universe primarily through our thoughts and the time universe primarily through our feelings. Now this is the last video in this Human Consciousness and Time series. Hopefully you enjoyed it and you learned something in the process. Thanks for watching. If you want to hear more of these Matrix of Time videos, please subscribe below to be notified of new presentations. You can also go to my website, www.multidimensionaltime.com, and there you'll see that there's a book available. There's also some technical white papers, and all the links to my videos that are available on my YouTube channel can be found on my website. Okay, thank you very much.